Well, thank you for joining us for our Lift ministry this evening. As we've been studying for now what will be the second of 3 months about faith fixer-uppers, I want you to understand the principle behind it. If you were to be interested in buying a house and you were to send an inspector, an individual who was going to go and do an inspection on the house, the goal would be that he would come back to you and say, here's a problem. Or we checked the electricity out and everything in the wiring is just fine. Plumbing is great. Septic system is good. But, and you would find out a particular issue that needed to be addressed, because before you actually put your money down to buy the house, you want to have it in reasonable shape. Well, it's that way in our spiritual lives. Sometimes we need to do an inventory. We need to have a faith fixer-upper. We need to find the projects that refer to our spiritual lives that need to be addressed. And so this is the lesson for this evening as we think about looking at envy and helping fix it up so that we have a greater sense of appreciation instead of that envy. I suppose we've all heard the expression, the grass is greener on the other side. It always looks like the neighbor's yard looks better than ours. There have been a lot of paraphrases to that. The grass is greener on the other side because their water bill is higher, or the grass is greener on the other side because that's where the septic tank is. There are a lot of lines. But I suppose we've also all experienced it somewhere, haven't we? Where we looked through our glasses and we saw another situation and we thought the grass was greener. Happens sometimes in marriages. You know, there's some pitfall times in the duration of a marriage. Second year after the first year has passed, the 7th year thereabouts, and the 25th year. All of those are danger points for special reasons, but an individual in that relationship looks out and says, I think the grass looks a little greener, for whatever reason, somewhere else. But you do realize, don't you, that affairs are an illusion. The attraction that another situation has is not realistic. It's not holistic. It may be meeting a particular need that's not being met in the marital relationship, but it doesn't address other issues and creates all kinds of additional problems. Second marriages have a higher divorce rate than first marriages. Other people are on a job and they think the job just is boring, it's tedious, it's a dead-end job. And so they look out at somebody else's job and they think the grass looks greener over there. Over the past 2.5 years with the pandemic, so many people have quit their jobs for a variety of reasons that there has been a phrase that's been attached. It's been called the Great Resignation. Yet now we're beginning to get studies that are done on those who resigned their jobs and find out that up as high as 75% of the people who quit, took new jobs, wish they had not made that change at all. Looking at others and their situations often raises within us a sense of envy or jealousy, that we wish we had or we were experiencing what it is that they had. Well, let me give you a case study tonight to think of out of the book of Genesis. We're going to be looking at Genesis 29 and 30 in a very interesting relationship that Jacob has with 2 wives that he takes. We won't have time to do the background story as to how he ended up with both Rachel and Leah. Leah, the older sister, who was supplanted onto him by her father because he wanted to marry Rachel, the younger one. But I want you to listen to what happens in the attitudes of these 2 sisters. Leah, in Genesis chapter 29, picking up at verse 30, Jacob went in to Rachel also, and indeed he loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served with Laban for another 7 years. Now the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, and he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and bore a son, and named him Reuben, for she said, because the Lord has seen my affliction, surely now my husband will love me. Down verse 34. She conceived again and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will become attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons. What was it that was missing in her life? Was her own satisfaction in her relationship with Jacob. And she was jealous of the love that he had toward her sister Rachel. But now the flip side to that is listen at how Rachel was responding to this. Chapter 30 and verse 1. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she became jealous of her sister. And she said to Jacob, "Give me children or else I die." And so she ultimately gives her handmaid Bilhah to be a surrogate wife to Jacob, and she's going to bear him children. Listen at how that turns out in verses 7 and 8. Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again, bore Jacob a second son, and so Rachel said, "With mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and I have indeed prevailed." Isn't it interesting? Leah was jealous of Rachel, and Rachel was jealous of Leah. You can read a similar kind of story in 1 Samuel chapter 1 as it has to do with Hannah and Peninnah, who were wives of Elkanah, and the jealousy that existed in that relationship. Well, we could take a lot of different stories, I suppose, that illustrate the problem that comes from envy and jealousy. Cain with Abel, Joseph with his brothers, the Pharisees even with Jesus, because the text says that even Pilate understood that he'd been delivered because of their envy that they had for him and his popularity. But I'm not quite as interested in history as I am interested in my own life, and tonight your interest in your spiritual fixer-upper. We want to explore our own lives. What issues and solutions might we find in our lives when we're looking out and thinking the grass looks greener somewhere else, and we're jealous and envious of somebody else's possessions or their relationships or the time that they're able to spend doing certain things or skill sets that they have? There are a lot of things that can create in us that green-eyed monster of envy. That how do we move from that to appreciating the blessings that we have? That's how you're going to help one another in your Lift groups this evening. Thank you again for tuning in, and you're going to be blessed by your discussions.